Europa. As one of four Jovian moons originally discovered by famed astronomer Galileo Galilei, Europa has been the subject of human fascination for 4 centuries now. But Jupiter has 95 moons. Why do we care about the 4th largest one? Well, for decades, scientists have speculated about a vast ocean on Europa, hidden under kilometers of ice. An ocean that may well harbor life. But how? How do these gosh darn scientists and their silly heliocentric round earth who's it's what's it's nonsense see a hidden ocean on a tiny moon millions of kilometers away? Well, you see, Europa is very smooth, much like your brain. Generally speaking, there aren't that many super smooth things in the solar system because big rocks called asteroids hit things and make them not smooth. So anything without a bunch of craters on it has to have some kind of geological process that is erasing those craters after they form. In the case of Europa, liquid water erupts from cryogeysers onto the surface of the moon, and it refreezes, coating the moon in a fresh layer of ice at all times. But even if it doesn't have craters, Europa does have some tiny wrinkles, as your brain should have, suggesting that there is some liquid under the surface that causes the crust to flex and buckle. According to deep state puppet organization NASA, 6 robotic spacecraft have explored Europa, providing us with more and more evidence of this ocean. Just last year, a 7th craft was launched toward Jupiter called Europa Clipper. But this mission won't reach Europa until 2030, so we've got some time to kill. And what better way to kill time than to play video games? I'm feeling some Stationeers. Huh? What's that, you say? I gasp. You haven't heard? Stationeers is an epic video game for cool gamers. Much like Minecraft, where you mine and craft, Stationeers also has mining and crafting. And better yet, Europa is the 3rd location we can play on. What a coincidence! Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not a tiny little baby who needs mommy to cut my pancakes for me, so I only play on the hardest difficulty. With a brutal start, Jupiter's intense magnetosphere causes our landercraft's computer to misbehave, leaving us only with the bare minimum supplies to survive. And on Stationeer difficulty, NASA has decided it would be nice if we didn't pollute Europa with plastic straws, so we're gonna have to drink water and eat with our helmet open. So put your jacket on, get some hot hands, and throw a heating pad down your pants because we're going to icy Europa to build an awesome base in space, right in the shadow of heckin' Chonkerino Jupiter. Now, if any of this seems a bit confusing to you, go back and watch the previous tutorials on Mars or the Moon first. Hey you're finally awake. We're about to land on Europa. When the door finally busts open, we see that it's very chill here. Too chill, like negative 140 degrees Celsius kind of chill. The only thing keeping the frostbite at bay is our suit and its battery, and that battery is draining, fast. Besides the power required to heat our suit, the biting cold is sapping power away from all of our batteries, even the ones just chilling in our tool belt. This is a brutal start too, so we didn't land with anything that's going to help us. To craft helpful items, we'll need to mine first. For the first night, we need a lot of iron, because this time we need to build out a safe space to craft in. We can't just leave everything outside, because this time outside is doing its best to kill us as fast as possible. Besides iron, we'll also need gold, because it's shiny and cool, copper because electronics, and silicon for plastic and glass. Also, we need some oxide ice and volatile ice to make fuel for our furnace. Once the sun is setting and we're stocked up on ores, it's time to start building the base. While the moon was very flat and covered in craters, and Mars was mostly flat with just a couple of mountains, Europa is completely covered in tall spikes of ice. These spikes can block our access to the sun, so let's bring our little yellow crate up on top of this plateau before we start building. That way it's easier to find later. Great, now we can place our iron frames. Iron frames are the foundation of our base, and this time we'll need to weld all 20 of them to airtightness eventually. But currently, I just want to get the arc furnace up and running as soon as possible so we have ingots for crafting. And to walk on a frame, we only need to weld it once. Unique to Europa is our power crate. We start with a wind turbine in addition to the solar panel. The wind turbine will produce a tiny amount of power all the time in a sinusoidal or wave-like pattern. Averaging out that sine curve, we get about 100 watts continuously. Not as good as a tracked solar panel overall, but it is cheaper and it works automatically, and at night. Once the power infrastructure is in place and we have some iron smelted, it's time to get some walls up to protect us from the elements. We'll also need some doors to finish the seal and pipes to remove the cold air from our crafting area. But pipes alone just store gas. We want to remove it. To vent gas from this space, we have three options. Craft a hydraulic pipe bender so we can make a passive vent to get rid of gas, build a bunch of pipes to hold all the gas, or burst a hole in a pipe and let the gas leak out. Given our time and material constraints, I'm sure you can imagine which one is the best for us. Luckily, bursting a pipe is especially easy on Europa. You see, all the gases in Stationeers have a phase change diagram. A phase change diagram describes what temperatures and pressures are required for a gas to remain a gas. Or we can see when it condenses into a liquid, or we can see when it freezes into a solid. If you remember back to the moon tutorial, we tried to keep the pressure low inside our radiator manifold to prevent solid CO2 or even liquid nitrogen from ruining our pipes. Now we want to ruin our pipes. The oxygen on Europa is already cold enough to be a liquid. We just need to raise the pressure. Once we have enough liquid and the pipes are being damaged, we'll just remove the one we want to keep and put it back later to make sure the outer pipe is the weakest link. Once one pipe in a network is being damaged, that will be the one to break before any other pipes. Once that outer pipe is burst, we can remove all the gas from our room and finally find inner peace. Now only our suit battery is draining, and our suit isn't working so hard to keep us warm. All this while our wind turbine is making power round the clock. And finally, with some flares, we can even save power on our flashlight. Now we want to make a gas furnace. Building a gas furnace to smelt our ores is even more important on Europa than the previous two planets due to our higher power demands. And because we are now as far as Jupiter, solar panels generate barely 60% as much power as they did on the moon, even if we were tracking the sun. Once the furnace is done and all of our ores have been smelted in descending order of melting point, we can make an electronics printer. With it, we can now make more wind turbines to stop worrying about all that power we're using. But the sun has risen to mark yet another morning on Europa, so it's time to mine again. Since we won't be making solar panels, we don't need to worry about collecting as much steel as usual. Instead, we'll focus more on iron, copper, and gold, just like yesterday, because these are the three things we need to make more wind turbines. But we still do want some steel in order to make a station battery to hold all that power. As I mentioned earlier, Europa has very rugged terrain that can easily obscure your base from view, so you should take extra care while mining to remember your way back, at least until we can make a tracking beacon. After the sun sets, we can go make those wind turbines. With 3 wind turbines, we're doing much better than we were before. Now we can craft a hydraulic pipe bender and worry more about our rapidly dwindling oxygen supply. Throughout the crafting process, I'm occasionally letting some cold oxygen back into the base. The furnace is full of hot gas, and we can use this heat in order to warm up the oxygen so we can fill up our air tank. But before we suck it all up, we should eat and drink in this temporarily habitable space. But we do need to be quick. The furnace will easily overheat the gas in here. And the sun rises yet again, so it's time to mine. But not before setting up the furnace chimney so we have a clean furnace to smelt with when we get back. I also started crafting a station battery that will set up when we get back from this mining expedition. Now that we have a solid power subsystem in place, we can set up the greenhouse. But right at the end I ran out of power in my suit and all my batteries, so I had to undertake a frantic search for a working battery, and that led me back inside. Now, with death narrowly avoided, the greenhouse is sealed, and we can vacuum out that space too. While the sun is much dimmer here in the Jovian system, there is still enough solar radiation to melt any ices we throw down under the windows of our greenhouse, so we'll do that and get back to mining. The earlier we set up potatoes, the sooner we stop worrying about food, so it's time to crush up the water ice we just mined. Be sure to check your battery before crushing up water though. Water has a very high heat capacity, which is the amount of energy needed to raise some amount of a substance by 1 degree centigrade. Another thing you might not know about water ice is that it's also 10% nitrogen, just like oxide, so we need a way to vent that from the ice crusher. I always just vent it right into the greenhouse in a brutal start to raise the pressure. Water gets used so slowly by plants that we rarely have to worry about crushing more anyway. Yet another factoid that's important to note is that flares are actually really hot, so be careful walking into your greenhouse with a flare running because it will raise the temperature inside, rapidly. The icy, jagged, and spiky terrain of Europa that I've been complaining about makes it very hard to find the base after a day of mining, since it could be behind a set of spikes. So I tend to make the tool printer much earlier on Europa, which allows us to craft a tracking beacon. Now with a tracking beacon we can do some hardcore mining. Today is finally the day that we want to collect some nickel to make Invar and Constantin. And as usual, we'll wait until after another day of mining to actually smelt it all, since it uses up so much fuel. And since we've got nothing to smelt and nothing essential to craft, and I don't really care to waste resources, I decide to wait out the night completely idle. Now there is a use in keeping our suit off, since it increases our hygiene, which increases our mood. A low mood increases our hunger rate, as well as decreasing our tool speed. So it's not really a big concern, but it's never a bad idea to be in a good mood. As we return to base, we can see our station battery is well on its way to being charged, and we have plenty of nickel with which we can smelt alloys. Once we have Constantin and Invar, we can do what we did on Mars and the Moon and craft printer upgrades, the advanced furnace and the heavy mining drill. I also made sure to save some materials to make Inconel for sensor lenses, which will give us X-ray vision for ores. The first full-scale project I decided to complete now that we're established is a system for capturing and heating large amounts of oxygen. By hooking up our furnace input and output into a large insulated tank, we can store and reuse hot gas from the furnace. Then we could build another tank with a vent for capturing O2 from the atmosphere. But of course it's too cold. With a heat exchanger, we can exchange heat from the waste gas to the oxygen network. And with a valve, we can control when the oxygen is being heated. A couple of pipe meters will help us keep track of everything we're doing without using a tablet, while a final one-way valve is going to allow us to remove waste gas when it gets too cold to properly heat anything else. Now, with potatoes growing, ore abounding, and oxygen aplenty, we can end it here. There are no logic systems or programmable chips that are essential this early on Europa, and I already made mini tutorials for those on the Moon and Mars respectively. Tune in next time to see Mimas, the second moon in the game, right in the shadow of the ever-so-beautiful Saturn, alongside a more in-depth tutorial for MIPS programming. Till next time.